Hello, and welcome to the Diet NPO podcast. My name is Zach Caseberg, and I'll be your host. How are you all today? You may have missed me last week because I was out on vacation. Maybe you knew that, maybe you didn't, maybe you don't care at all. But I had my first ever cruise experience from Miami to the Dominican Republic, all the way to the Bahamas, and I had an excellent time throughout. And this was an adults only type of cruise. So we really, to say the least, that there were some people really getting after it during this thing. You had anyone from 20-year-olds to 70-year-olds just getting down and enjoying their vacation. And it was a large cruise, so if maybe you're sharing my paranoia, you'd be worried about getting norovirus, but I will say that I was very impressed with the selection of foods that I had, and I look forward to telling you about this test kitchen during the What's Eating You segment. By the way, I'm starting also to wonder if people who tell themselves that they got food poisoning really may have just enjoyed the cruise just a little bit too much. I have a first-hand experience where I had a night before that was extracurricular, to say the least, and I woke up having those same thoughts and feelings. Maybe it was something that I ate. But the headache quickly reassures you that no, it was probably not the food to blame here. It takes a little self-research in that case to really know what was the cause, right? And research is a big topic that a lot of my students tend to struggle with for multiple reasons. Maybe you were just never motivated by it. Maybe you never had a good teacher to walk you through research. But we know that research on the RD exam is odd and it tends to be very term specific, not very engaging either. So maybe I could engage you a little bit in research, give you some of those specific topics that you need to know. Now, Domain 1, Topic C, is what research is going to be about. And here's a couple of things that the Academy mentions for this part of the domain. Types of research, research approval, data collection, analysis, applications of statistical analysis, data presentation, reporting, even grading of research. Feels like a lot, right? And I don't feel like we're going to be able to get through all that in one podcast, but I did want to give you the broad strokes of the research so that you know what to take into the exam. We won't worry about the nitty-gritty so much, as I'm going to give you some of the more digestible materials that I know that most of my students struggle with. So get your notes, your coffee and your tea, and come learn a little bit of research with me. Now, I'll talk about my thesis with you all to help give you some examples to go through research and designs. Plus, it just makes my job a little easier. My thesis was testing the cooking competence in college students who received a recipe card or a cooking video, and we were trying to see the competence to see those differences. I developed what's called a research question, so make note of this term. My research question was very general. Do college students have greater cooking competence when they watch a video compared to a recipe card? It's a question, right? It's just way up in the air there. Research questions are great because they can lead you to forming a hypothesis. Think about hypothesis as being that if and then statements, more matter of fact. If college students watch a cooking video, then they'll have greater competence compared to those who only do the recipe card. Easy, right? So we've got a hypothesis, a specific statement. You'll also need to know what's called the null hypothesis, and don't think too much into this. Null just means no. So if my hypothesis is what I just told you, the null hypothesis would be saying that there is no relationship or no difference between these two groups. You see, my hypothesis and the null hypothesis are kind of contrasting there. After these steps, you'd go through your protocol of preparing your study, organizing your methods, collecting your data, and you're going to make your inferences based on that data that you analyze. A big thing that we will do, especially if we're talking about some quantitative data, is we can run a statistical analysis. Statistical analysis will help you come up with a p-value. Ever heard of this term before? The p-value denotes the clinical significance between the two groups. What is that standard p-value that we always want you to know for the RD exam? Well, a p-value that is generally considered significant, or good in this case, would be a p-value that is less than or equal to 0.05. 5. This would be saying that my results are significant and reliable. In my case, for my study, if my p-value was less than 0.05, then that means that my hypothesis was correct and that there's a very low chance or low probability that I'm wrong. If my p-value had been less than 0.05, then in fact my hypothesis would have been true. To say that, hey, the kids who watch cooking videos have greater confidence than the ones who do a recipe card. All you need to know for your p-value is understand that 0.05 less than or equal to. If there was an area that really got my students in the past, I would say it was types of research and the difference between descriptive and analytical research. Now, there is no shots fired here for any researchers because they're all greater than me. But in general, I would say analytical research, I want you to think of as being very serious, very concrete, and very useful in the clinical setting. Descriptive research is less serious and can't really lead to more of this clinical significance that we're looking for, and hopefully you'll understand why. The types of studies that you would be seeing in descriptive research are things such as qualitative research studies, case studies, surveys. Remember these terms, write them, and let's get them down specifically together. Qualitative research is measuring the quality of something, and it's purely observational, such as doing a study with a focus group where you sat in with a group of low-income mothers and getting their opinions on WIC services. This is purely qualitative. There's no numbers being measured here, so that's why it's going to be a qualitative type of study. A case report or a case study is when you have a subject or a small group that you're reporting on. You could be testing the effects of a cancer drug in a small group of 5 patients to see the effects on their cancer. But it's not like it's a large study with a control group, with a treatment group, a blind recruitment. You have a small group of people that you want to test this drug on. That would be a good example of a case study or a case series. This is still descriptive. You've done plenty of surveys in your past, and I'm sure you can understand how this would be another example of just kind of a descriptive type of research, right? Where it's just kind of going through someone's opinion of something. We might not really be measuring something that we can make clinical significance on in that case. This is a good moment to touch on correlation versus causation before we talk about analytical research. Now, correlation means that there is a relationship between 2 variables. And causation means that variable A caused variable B. These are 2 different things. We need examples. Let's say this. There is a correlation between smoking and lung cancer if we did a study. If we also tested it, I think we could all agree that smoking does in fact cause lung cancer, as we found. So smoking and lung cancer, there's both a correlation and a causation there. Now let's talk some silly examples. What if I did a bunch of interviews and a bunch of surveys, and I learned that people feel more depressed on rainy days? So I do this survey and I found out, wow, there's this correlation between people that say they have higher depression on rainy days. But I'll ask you, do you think that rainy days cause depression? Well, probably not, right? We can find a correlation between lots of stuff. I could find a correlation between blue sheets and making you sleep better. It doesn't mean that there's actual causation that blue sheets make you sleep better, but you could find a correlation between everything. We can even measure the strength of a correlation using something I want you to be familiar with called your R value. R value is a numerical expression that is used to kind of express the strength of that correlation. It is expressed on a scale of -1 all the way to +1. And I'm going to use my hand to show direction in this case. So let's picture an X and a Y axis. Y axis up here, X axis here, Y and X here. An R value is going to be expressed with a straight line, and if it was going up like this would be an R value of +1. This is a positive, strong relationship showing that as x goes up, y is going up as well. Now, if my arm was going down like this would mean this is an R value of -1, meaning there's a strong negative relationship between those two things. So there's a strong relationship, but it's a -1, meaning as my x variable was going up, my y variable was going down in that case. Now grab your lab coats, we're getting analytical. Analytical can test a hypothesis. We'll have an experimental model where participants are randomized into two groups, a control and a treatment group. We'll keep it simple for now and say that both groups go through the study, and then we're analyzing the differences between that treatment and control group. The best method for this is known as a double-blind study, where the experimenter is blind to who got put into which treatment group or not, and the participant is unsure as to which group that they got placed in, treatment or control. Following designs are all analytical. Quasi-experimental means quasi or multiple. This is when you're going to take multiple kind of tests leading up to the study, and then you'll take multiple tests after the study to see that transferability of those results. A parallel design is when you're going to picture two parallel lines. Group A and B remain in their treatment or control group respectively throughout that whole study, so there's no crossover between those two. They stay in the same the whole time. But a crossover is where these two groups would switch halfway through the study. Now group A, who was getting the treatment, well, they're getting the control in that last half of the study. That group B, who was getting the control at the start, well, now they're getting the treatment through that last half of the study. You can even have two periods of this where they cross over midway through and then cross over again to finish the study. So be familiar with those different types of studies of a parallel, crossover, or two-period crossover, as they're different designs we can have. Take a breath with me. We only have a few players to go through. They all start with C, these three, so be careful with me. These three types of analytical studies are known as cohort, case control, and cross-sectional studies. With cross-sectional, I want you to think of an X. You are measuring the outcome at a specific point in time. This can be like saying how many people have COVID in the country right now. You're measuring the outcome at one time, not forwards, not backwards. Picture that X, and you should have those cross-sectional right down. You remember that group of people you may have graduated with? This is known as your cohort. A cohort is a group, and cohort studies are when you take a group of people and you track them forwards or backwards in time. I like the idea of taking a cohort of dietetic students that we track forward in time to see where they end up in dietetics, or I can track them backwards in time to see what they did up to becoming a dietetic intern. Remember, the cohorts can be both prospective and retrospective. Case control is our third. Imagine that we have a group of 50-year-old men, a bunch of them who have lung cancer and a bunch of them who don't have lung cancer. We can split them up into the case or the control group, the case being the ones with the lung cancer, the control being the ones without the lung cancer. So a case control studies are purely retrospective. What you do is you are going to take these two separate groups and you're going to go look backwards in time to see the differences in those past behaviors. Maybe the treatment group or the case group was exposed to Agent Orange in Vietnam, or maybe they were smokers. Maybe the control group was not exposed or were non-smokers. Now we're almost there, and I want to finish by walking you through some comparisons of research. You'll see a lot of questions where they ask, is this specific to this term or this term? And again, they can be complicated. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but let's get it straight. Retrospective versus prospective. If I say that those clothes on you look so retro, then what would you think? Well, I'd be saying that those clothes are quite from the past. So retrospective studies are looking back in time. Ask a sports fan in your house and in your family about what a prospect is. A prospect is someone that is preparing to go into the big leagues. So prospective studies are ones that are starting now and looking forwards in time. What about validity, reliability? Well, we all need a friend that's reliable, right? Reliable in the sense that they're consistent, they're dependable, and you can count on them. You know who's not reliable? That friend we lose about halfway through the night and we end up bailing them out at the end of the night. You can't rely on these people, so they're not very reliable. Reliability is talking about the consistency of these test results. If I use a measuring tape and it consistently measures out 1 foot for me every single time, that is a reliable measuring tape. But if I take one measurement and it says it's 13 inches and then it's 7 inches, that's not going to be very reliable, not a good reliable measuring tape. Validity is when your instrument is testing what is it intended to test. A study where I was measuring the weight of my participants, I could use a scale to measure their weight. That is a valid instrument. But if I was using a scale to measure their body temperature, well, that might not be a very valid instrument in that case. Sensitivity versus specificity. Huge struggle for my students. Sensitivity, I want you to look at the test and think of sensitivity as being the positive results, the proportion of those that test positive. Specificity will always be negative. So it'll be the proportion of individuals that test negative for that. The last one to finish you off here is your independent versus dependent variable. Is there anything more that hangs us up from elementary school to this point other than independent and dependent variables? I don't think so. We need to simplify it, and we need to always remember that the independent variable is what that experimenter is manipulating. In my thesis, we looked at the type of intervention, the recipe card, or the video that they got. That was my independent variable. That is what I modified as the researcher. The dependent variable is the stuff that is being modified based on that intervention type. So the influencer or the experimenter is monitoring this, kind of like that confidence, but we're not actively touching and manipulating these results. We're purely watching them. So confidence in cooking was the thing that I was tracking to see the difference between those. That was my dependent variable. We'll use the study or the intervention type as the independent, what I modify. And the dependent is what is changing based on those. It's dependent on the others. Now that I've given you so much research, I hope that was helpful for you to learn through. To help put these together, let's just do 3 quick true and false type questions to help with our learning. True or false? A R value of -1 would indicate a strong negative correlation between 2 variables. True or false? A R value of -1 would indicate a strong negative correlation between the variables. Well, that is true, right? -1 is this line going down, and it would be indicating a strong negative relationship. True or false? Cohort studies are only retrospective. True or false? Cohort studies are only retrospective. This would actually be a false statement. Cohort studies can be retrospective, where you're looking backwards in time, but they could also be prospective, right, where you're looking forwards. So they can be both, and we just have to remember that. True or false? Randomized controlled trials would be considered descriptive research. True or false? Randomized controlled trials would be considered descriptive research. This again would be false. Remember, descriptive research is where you're observing and doing those qualitative type of studies. Analytical research is more serious and would really have that attribute of those randomized different groups. Before we talk about cruises, please remember, any way you can help out the show, the Diet NPO podcast, by liking, reviewing, subscribing, or sharing wherever you get your podcasts always helps. You can always watch the pod on YouTube as well, Zach_snacks on Instagram, Threads, YouTube, just to help you with any other RD exam or tutoring needs. You can always reach out to me through there. The What Eating You segment will be about our favorite meal on the cruise we had. Keeping in mind that the food is already included in the total cost of the cruise, so it feels like you're getting a free meal even though it certainly isn't. We did a short tasting of 4 to 5 dishes. And this was at their test kitchen, which is a small kind of reservation only type of restaurant that they had on the cruise. Our first was a mushroom pate that was shaped like a mushroom. So it was a squishy flavor of tons of umami just packed into that paste. And it was shaped like a mushroom, looked very beautiful and very fun. Next was a smoked egg yolk over peas and citrus oil. So you broke the eggs and mixed it with the peas, and then you served that on top of bread or a toasted crostini. Next was the main course, which is a venison tenderloin with an au jus sauce on top. And we finished the night with a blue cheese ice cream. Some of you going, oh, so gross, Zach. But it was also interesting and it was also fun just to go and try things. Glad I enjoyed it. I'm glad I did not get sick either. I hope you all enjoyed this great studying from the podcast we had this week. If you're preparing to take the exam soon, I wish you the best of luck always. Happy studying to my RDs to be, and I'll see you all later.